and welcome to another Teacher Talk section. Teacher Talk 72. Yes. Now, tonight we are going to have our 72nd session. And for tonight, we have another very important educator for ELT world. Not only an educator, author, material writer, teacher trainer, and also presenter. And I'm sure that most of you used his book, or maybe have been using it, or maybe right now we are using it. And when he comes, we are going to start our live sessions. And tonight we have John Hughes. Yes, I'm really excited to invite him here and start talking about his ideas, his experiences, and the things that he is doing. I've invited him. Yes, John is here. Perfect.
Hi, Volkan.
Oh,
How are you?
I'm fine. It's great to see you. Yes, John, it's wonderful. And I would like to, before starting our live sessions, I would like to say really a huge thank you to you to accept my invitation and for teacher talks. This is really important moment for us.
You're most welcome. I'm very honored to be invited. On number 72.
Yeah, this is what, yeah, number 72. Yeah, this is really, really, I still can't believe it after using your books and after joining your webinars or listening to you, and now you are here in Teacher Talks. It's really great.
Very
Okay.
nice to see you. And nice to see
uh,
some other people out there. I can see a few names.
yeah,
I guess people are with us. I don't know how many people are with us, but people are with us.
they're coming slowly, but I know that we are all busy, and if you're ready we can start.
Yeah, let's get going.
All right then. I know about you, John, but maybe our listeners, they would like to know about you. So can you tell us about yourself, please, and a bit about your experiences too?
Okay. So my name's John Hughes. I started teaching about 30 years ago.
Wow.
I studied in London, and then I spent a year teaching refugees in London. This was the time of the Bosnian conflict 30 years ago. Some people weren't born then. And so I had to help these refugees arriving in London to speak English. And then I got a job in Poland. So this was 1993, 94, 95. Then I went to Italy for a while. Then I came back to England and I started training teachers. So in Italy and Poland, I got quite heavily involved with business English and English for specific purposes. I actually worked for language schools, but I also worked for companies. So I spent 6 months in an Italian car factory, for example, helping the engineers to use the English documents. So a lot of my background is sort of English for specific purposes at first, English for business purposes. Then I came back to the UK and I started training teachers. And I managed a department in England where we trained teachers and they went all over the world. I did that for a few years. And then I was starting to write books more and more. And I think I wrote my first book in 2004.
Wow.
And it was a teacher's book to support a student book. It was with Oxford University Press. I was very lucky. I got the opportunity to write the teacher's book. And then from there, they asked me to write more. And eventually I sort of left my full-time job and I became self-employed and I started writing a lot. And I also doing a lot of teacher training and consultancy, that kind of thing, presenting. Yeah. And I've been doing that really sort of ever since until now. Yeah.
It's wonderful. Yeah, you have huge experience about the education, really. Thank you very much for sharing that. So, my next question is, what was or were your turning point or points in your own education?
Yeah, I saw that question. I have to say, Volkan, you've written some amazing questions. It's one that I've really had to think very hard about. Some of them are very difficult. Turning points in my education. In my own education, in England, where I grew up, we have exams, important exams, when we're about 15, 16 in school. And I really struggled, and I wasn't interested in school at that age, and I failed a lot of those exams. But the turning point was one or two teachers in the school who turned around and said to me, no, you should have another go, stick at it. And I went back and I did it again, did the exams again. And it was a combination of the teacher, and it was a combination of me just becoming the right kind of age and the maturity to understand that it was suddenly important. And that always sticks in my memory, particularly when I've taught teenagers, because it's very easy when you teach teenagers to, when you've stayed up all night planning a lesson and you think, I've got the best lesson in the world, or I've worked so hard. And then you go into a class of teenagers and one or two of them just destroy your lesson. Most people who've
Exactly.
taught teenagers have had that experience. And it's so frustrating. But I think my own personal experience of education when I was a teenager kind of always reminds me to remember that, I might have a group of teenagers age 15, but there's very different age sort of development and interest. And teenagers of that age have got a lot going on in their life. So I think as a teacher, you kind of have to remember that. And so that was an important learning point in my life. My life at university was very important because I suddenly learned what it meant to want to learn and to be an autonomous learner.
Uh-huh.
And again, I went looking for learning. I didn't wait for the teacher to come to me. So that was important. Other important learning points. Wow. I mean, the first time you ever teach is probably the most frightening learning point, isn't it? I mean, everybody remembers the
Probably.
first lesson they ever taught. It's scary, but you walk away from it and you're stressed and you're nervous and you think this is horrific, but something inside you says, but there was something about it I liked and I'm going to go back and do it again. And you keep working at it. And I actually think, I've been teaching and presenting and talking for 30 years, and I still think you have those moments, when either you're having a particular day or the people you're talking to, it's just not working in some way, and you walk out and you think, yeah, that could have gone better, but you have to kind of pick yourself up and you go and do it again, kind of thing. So those learning points are important. I don't know, there's been so many. And often a lot when I do teacher training, I have teacher training is really important because you can be teaching somebody who's only just started teaching, but you're reminded of something you used to do.
Uh-huh.
Or you can be working with teachers who have lots of experience, and you can sometimes feel you've walked out of the session having thought about things and learnt as much, possibly more, than the people in the session, just because of the discussion and the richness. So learning opportunities, they come up at unexpected times in a way. It depends, and you have to be open to them and kind of respond to them. So it's
I see.
quite a big question, Volkan.
I can understand, and thank you very much, John, to sharing your lovely moments with us, and very, the useful one, especially. Thank you very much. And you have a really lots of experiences about education, but I wonder about your philosophy of teaching. So, what is your philosophy of teaching?
Ooh, and again, another big
Tough
difficult
question.
question. It's difficult to say philosophy. One thing I think about when I hear people say this is the right way to teach or this is the correct method, I'm very suspicious, because I think if you teach long enough, you discover that there isn't, you can't say something works. All you can say is, here's another way of coming at something, because certain things will work with different students. So philosophy suggests there's one way of sort of looking at it. I think what's influenced me probably more than anything else is my early years of teaching were firstly with refugees, and I just started teaching and there was no course book. I
Yeah.
used course books, but none of them were right for that context. Nowadays, you can find materials for those kinds of students. There are books, English as second language, English for refugees. But 30 years ago, there really wasn't much out there, and I had to learn to create materials, which was where my love of creating materials came from. But I think the starting point was to think, well, what do these people need to do with English? And if you can find that out at the beginning, and then always be thinking, how am I responding to the needs? I think that's an important philosophy, because these students who were arriving in England at that time, they didn't have much English, but they needed to operate quickly. They didn't need a load of grammar. They needed to go to the shop. They needed to apply for a job. They needed to find a home. So it was very much of, what's the need? What's the English I need to give them? And then my next job was lots of business English teaching. So it was very much, well, what sort of business? Are you involved in shipping? Are you involved in paint? Are you involved in banking? I'm only saying those because I taught all those types of students. And always with business English, your starting point is, well, what's the need? What's the student aim? And I think that trains you in a certain mindset or a philosophy to teach, and you always start with the learner need and work backwards. And maybe we'll come on to backward planning later, but it's linked with that. After that, it's slightly different, because then I started teaching teenagers and students in a secondary school situation. Of course, the need is different because the students don't know what the need is, and the need is defined by the curriculum. But I still think that the need involves finding out what the students are interested in, what they do in their free time, and trying to make connections between what you're doing in class and what you're teaching with those needs. So I still think I think that's central to a lot of what I see. The way I would approach a class. Yeah.
I see. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, John, for this nice answer and with the philosophy of teaching. And would you like to add anything else, or can I move to another question?
You can move to another if you like.
Okay.
Well, I'm interested to know what your philosophy of teaching is, actually.
My philosophy of teaching. Oh, that's really.
Well, I assume you have an answer as soon as you asked the question. So I was interested.
Yeah, I have an answer, but yeah, I actually when I go into the classroom, actually I was thinking that I also agree with you that there is no specific the way, I mean, like, to teach to the students. I mean, we need to see their needs, and we need to see how can they learn better, and you need to find the best way to teach them. And I cannot say that, okay, this is my philosophy, I need to only use this way to teach them. No, I can't do that. I need to understand how they learn, and understand how they like to learn something. This is what I like. Okay, there's only one way, but maybe they don't like the way that I teach them. So I need to find a kind of the fun way to teach. I always like to teaching something with fun.
Yeah.
With them, because the students that I teach always are fifth graders, and it is I've been I've been teaching that more than 13 years, but in these 13 years I always teach the fifth graders, and without fun it is really difficult to teach them something. So you need to always find a very fun way to teach what you want to teach them, even if a grammatical structure or in speaking can be speaking topic, or even with writing. You need to somehow find this the effective way to teach them. That's what I'm thinking
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, that kind of engagement and motivation. I mean, we can talk about fun. I think we probably mean engagement, don't we? Because what's fun for one student isn't necessarily fun for another. So it's
Yeah, you're
it's a
right.
tricky one. But, you know, I know what you mean. It's that engagement factor. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. All right, thank you. I think my answer is quite good for
Good.
you. All right. Okay, so I know that you have written books and you have written a lot of ELT materials, but how did you decide to write ELT materials, or what was your aim about it?
Well, it goes back to the beginning when I had to create my own materials because there weren't any for the students. And then for when I started teaching and I got my first job at a language school and somebody said, here's a course book, teach with it. I started very quickly started writing my own materials to kind of supplement the course book. I think lots of teachers do this to adapt the course book to the particular needs. But after a while, I think I thought also I could probably produce better materials. I was quite kind of big-headed, maybe. I don't know. But I think, you know, with youth in my 20s, I was sort of felt that I could do something a bit. But I had a lot of failure. I mean, I had lots of ideas for books, and I would send them off to publishers, and I'd get a nice letter back saying, "Thank you very much, but we're not interested. Get back in touch in 2 years' time," and so on. So I kind of struggled, but I spent a lot of time writing materials for myself. And then there's that time when you've written something and you've got a friend or a colleague, a teacher in the teacher's room said, I don't know what I'm going to do today in my lesson. And they need something, and you say, oh, try this. And you give them the worksheet you've written, or maybe you've made a lesson based on a song or something. And sometimes you see the teacher afterwards and you say, how did the lesson go? And they say, well, it was okay. And it was sort of like, they sort of liked the material. But other teachers said, oh, it's fantastic. Have you written any more? You know. So you learn, I mean, if anybody wants to get into materials writing, an important step is write it for yourself, but then give it to other people and see if they can teach with it. Because the real test of materials is, can another teacher teach with it? I can make materials that I can teach with, but can my colleague use it, you know? And I like doing that. I like sharing it. And then I started to send off materials to journals. I mean, nowadays we would put them on the internet and share them on blogs, but this was before the internet. So we sent off materials to magazines, to English teaching magazines. There aren't so many around anymore. There used to be more. But anyway, we'd send them, and then they might get them published, and the magazine would have an editor, and you'd get feedback from the editor, and you'd get better. And then eventually, you have to do a bit of self-promotion if you want to get into paid materials writing. You have to sort of present in webinars and conferences, and then publishers might approach you. I mean, it's a very different situation now compared to 20, 25 years ago. But eventually, I got the opportunity to work with Oxford University Press. And also, sometimes publishers ask teachers to give feedback on materials that they're developing. And I wrote some feedback, and they liked it, and they said, have I got any? So I kind of got in that way. But also, before I was a teacher, I'd done a little bit of journalism, and I knew how to write. I'd written theatre reviews and things like that, so I kind of knew about writing. I knew, and I liked doing it. So I kind of had some experience. But I mean, that doesn't really stop it. You don't need that. I mean, there's plenty of teachers who write very good materials and move into it. I mean, every
Yeah.
summer I run an online course in materials writing with Oxford University, and well, the last 2 years it's been online. Sometimes we do it face to face, but because of COVID, we've done it online. And every year I get amazing materials from the teachers that come on the course. You know, it's materials they're producing, but they've never shown their materials to other teachers. And on my course, they get the opportunity to share them. And it's exciting when you write stuff and people use it, you know.
Yeah,
Fun.
of course. I'm sure that is really exciting. Like we also used your book somehow. So that's really wonderful. So we could teach. Really, it was wonderful. All right. So my next question is about actually related with this one. Is it easy to write an ELT material? So what are the criteria when you write it, and how long does it take to write one material to you?
What do you mean by material? Do you mean a book?
I mean, yeah, book. Let's say I made the ELT books, for example. Let's say
Okay.
books.
So I've got some with me. There's one I wrote called Life.
Live, yeah.
This is 6 levels. This took National Geographic contacted me about it in 2009. Then we started to develop the idea in 2010, but it didn't get published till 2012. So it would, from beginning to end, it was about 3 years, but that included discussion and planning and then the writing. And we did 6 levels and I wrote 2 of the levels. So to write one book, you normally need kind of a year, but then you have to remember it also has to be edited, designed, the audio has to be recorded, maybe you have to make the video. So it's a long process before it actually is ready to go on to the classroom. It depends on the book. So for that kind of material, I mean, if I'm working on a new course book, my own personal time is probably maybe a year, but then after that, I need to keep looking at it because it'll go to designers and it'll come back and it'll change. And I think sometimes people think that if you're the materials writer, you do everything. You don't. It's a huge team project, and nowadays materials are produced or published materials are published more by teams than individuals, really.
I see.
I mean, sometimes I feel a bit guilty because my name's on the front cover, and I did write it, but there's a lot of other people involved. You need to look inside the front cover, and you'll see a long list of names, and those are people who are crucial to the process. So, I tend to think of it as a sort of team project rather than an individual thing.
Individual thing.
If I write methodology books, like resource books, quite often, sometimes it can be quite quick because it's in my head and I've been wanting to write it for a long time. So I wrote this book, which is the ETpedia series. It's a book about materials writing. And I wrote it with my colleague,
Wonderful.
Lindsay Clanfield. And it's basically a teacher resource book on how to write your own materials. And there's about 1,000 tips in it, but it's kind of like 100 units. And when we wrote it incredibly quickly because it was like years and years of experience, and then we just threw it on the page. And when you write a book like that, it's not as complicated as a course book because you don't have to have photographs and design and so on. So it's a different kind of. So we probably wrote that in 3 to 4 months, writing it all down. Then it went to the editor. Then it came back. So that's a much quicker process.
I see. Thank you very much for this information. So I would like to move to another question, but which is really related to online teaching. Especially after the COVID-19, we move more and more to online teaching rather than face-to-face. But actually, thanks God, we slowly move to face-to-face teaching again. But still we use online teaching. So can you give us some practical tips for online teaching?
Yeah, in fact, I first started teaching online in 2004 because I did teacher training online. So I'd actually done quite a lot of work with teacher training, with online training many years ago. I think what was different this time was that a lot of the online teaching this time was face to face, but through live lessons through Zoom and so on, or MS Teams or whatever you use. And that's a slightly different dynamic. But there is a very good theory of online teaching that comes from the author Gilly Salmon. She wrote a book called E-Moderating in the year 2000. It's old now by technology terms. But the basic principles are still very solid. She says there are 5 kind of steps. The first step is to make sure that you know what the technology is and how to use it, and you're confident with helping your students use it. And I think that's absolutely true. And if you think to the beginning of COVID, teachers didn't have that. There was a survey that I did. I worked with National Geographic Learning, and we did a survey of 7,000 teachers.
Wow.
75% of those teachers were teaching live online for the very first time last year. And one of their main problems was dealing with the technology. So you've got to deal with that. I think there are some advantages because, of course, you can teach students the English they need to use the technology. So when you're using Zoom and you say, hey, your microphone isn't on or the sound isn't working, you can actually teach students those phrases and they're kind of learning
Yes.
English while they're talking about the technology. So I think that's important. Step 2 for Salmon is online socialization, which is the students getting to know each other and you getting to know the students. And that's the other key thing that came out of the survey of lots of online teachers. There's a problem with student engagement, with motivation. I mean, students were, we were all getting a
Yes.
bit depressed. So we had to kind of engage and motivate. But that's the second step. And I think there's a lot of techniques for kind of getting to know the students. I mean, before a course starts, I might make a little video recording of myself and say hello and send it to them and introduce myself. Simple things like that can make a big
I see.
difference, I think. And I have another activity where I like to show a prop, something that's very personal to me, and the students have to ask me yes no questions and guess why it's important. And then I say, now you get an object that's important to you, hold it up to the camera and we'll ask you questions. And because they're at home, it's very easy for the students to reach for something personal. And I think that those simple kind of activities actually can really help with the engagement and the sort of
Absolutely.
people getting to know each other at the beginning. Then other tips, there's a danger that everybody's sharing their course book on the screen now. And, we have that expression, death by PowerPoint. It's a phrase meaning when you show lots of slides and the audience starts to fall asleep because they're just watching slide after slide.
Slide.
I changed it to an expression, death by screen share. Where we just screen share and we share the course book and then we kind of try to teach from the course book for an hour on a screen and we don't do anything else, and it just kills a lesson. So you've got to kind of start to think outside the box about what other tools and items you can use. How can I use the breakout room? Can I use the webcam in a more interesting way? Can I use emoticons? Can I use the chat? You kind of have to sort of exploit those things and make use of them. And then obviously group work, pair work with breakout rooms, project work. I don't think those things change. There's just everything takes longer online. Explaining an activity, checking everything just takes longer. It's just you have to plan less. I don't think you get through as much material.
I see. Probably today I had the same situation you mentioned just now, like that by screen share. I shared the book and I had my half an hour lesson. It was on the just looking at the book, the sharing book, and try to do it at that. That was
I think you just have to, in your planning, normally you would look at, say, the page in a course book and you would think, okay, this is going to happen in the face-to-face lesson. You suddenly have to think, okay, at what point am I going to remove the book from the screen, do something else, and then come back to the book? So I kind of vary the dynamic. One other tip I often give online teachers is to say, think of ways to get the students standing up or moving, because to sit and look at a screen for maybe a 60-minute lesson, it's you want to be, I mean, I often teach my online classes standing up, so I raise my desk and I put the screen up so that I stand, just because otherwise I'm sitting all day. And if I share that to my students, quite often they start to stand when we have lessons. Or I think of activities that will get them moving. Like if you're teaching vocabulary, I might play that game where you're miming and the students have to guess the word, and then I'll get them to mime down the webcam and we have to guess the word, because it involves some movement and activity. Anything like that, just to break up the that pattern. Because in a face-to-face class, they wouldn't be just looking at one screen or at one book. They'd be turning to a partner or moving around or maybe coming to the board. I mean, you've got to have that physical movement, I think. Yeah.
I see. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, John, about this information with the online teaching. We really need that. Thank you. And my next, can I move to another question?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. And I know that there are very different way of giving feedback to the students, but I have this question in my mind. Which one is more important, immediate or delayed feedback?
Well, they're not, I don't think one is more important than the other. I think it depends what you're giving feedback on. So if I have a student who makes a mistake in a lesson, so if I've just presented a grammar point for the last 10 minutes, every teacher's had this experience. So you've just been teaching conditionals, and then you start to check, have all the students understood? Can they start to use it? And you think, okay, good. And then you give them a task to do where you know they're supposed to be using conditionals. If in that moment you hear them making a mistake with a conditional, you're probably going to correct it because they would expect you to. I would expect the teacher to if I was the student. And also because that's the focus of the lesson. But if I'd been teaching first conditional and then a student was trying to create a sentence that actually needed a mixed conditional, I wouldn't give immediate feedback at that point, because I'd be trying to give them feedback or comments on something that they're not ready to deal with. So much about feedback depends on what the level of the student, and are they at the point where they're ready for that feedback. And then sometimes things like delayed feedback are important when you're dealing with writing skills, for example, because the student needs to go off and think. If you start writing or giving feedback on how to improve essay structure, they kind of need to go off and think about it and then redo it, don't they? So you can't do it immediately. So it depends a lot on what you're teaching, I think.
I see. Thank you very much.
I don't know. Would you agree?
No, I agree totally. I just wonder your ideas about this one. Which one is? I totally agree.
But I mean,
about
it's
it.
not
Depends.
a sort of science, is it? It's a kind of there's so many different factors as a teacher when you're in the middle of a lesson deciding, do I correct now or not? Should I delay it? Should I leave it? Because in 2 lessons time we're doing something else and we can deal with that again.
That's exactly. Definitely, I totally agree with you. Like, it depends on what we teach in the classroom. If the things that the immediate feedback we should give it, we should give that at that point. But as you mentioned, that if it's the writing, or maybe we can also do it with the speaking activities.
Yeah, well, certainly speaking fluency. I mean, if you've got students having an interesting discussion and they're genuinely passionate about it, you don't want to
Exactly.
interrupt it correcting somebody's third person ending, because it's just not important for it's not
Definitely.
affecting understanding, and they really want to express themselves, so you should just let them get on with it. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you very much, John. And so I really wonder what are you going to say to these questions? Because I am sure that for my next question, most of the people asking you your good experiences about teaching. But this time I would like to ask vice versa. Can you tell us one of your bad teaching experiences in your career?
Oh, the first time I ever taught 10-year-olds, I was totally unprepared. I hadn't been trained. My teaching experience with adults, and I went to work for a language school, and they wanted me to teach a class of 10-year-olds, and it was frightening. And the first one or two lessons were just a total disaster. I didn't know how to plan a lesson for that age group. It's totally different from teaching adults. Um, and I never really got trained in it. And training is so important. And it's crazy in English language teaching. We seem to expect teachers to teach in situations and without training them. We just think, oh, you speak English, you've done a bit of teaching, you can go and teach that age group. I mean, it's utterly crazy, because a 10-year-old, there's so many issues, and I should have been trained, and I wasn't really supported. And it was frightening, but actually by the end of the year, that group of students grew to like me. I grew to like them, and I kind of felt proud of myself that I survived, and that I didn't, that I managed to teach younger learners. I mean, since then, I've had children, so now actually I feel far better equipped, because I understand how children think much more. But when I first did it, I didn't know. Other bad experiences? I mean, we've all had the class with the student who just wants to make our life hell. I mean, there's just people out there, but sometimes you can magnify it. I mean, you can confuse students misbehaving with students just having a bit of fun. And I think if you're a teacher and you're quite stressed, sometimes it can be hard to join in that kind of thing. So, it sort of varies. And then with online teaching, I've had the online lessons where the technology has just completely given up,
I see.
or I've done presentations at conferences where the technologies work. I went to one once in France where I had a projector and my screen, and every time my foot pressed down on a certain floorboard, the screen went off. So I had to spend the whole conference not moving, doing my presentation with one foot on a particular floorboard to guarantee that the screen would project on the slide. And I mean, that sticks in my memory because it was such a crazy situation.
Thank you very much.
I think the longer you teach, the more you have these experiences, and at first you kind of punish yourself and think it's your own fault, but after a while, I mean, there are just some things that are out of your control. You can't.
Yeah, I see. Thank you very much for these moments that you share with us. Thank you, John.
Yeah, I mean, there've been loads, but
I see. And I would like to ask you a question, something that I think, watched one of your videos, but if it's possible, can you tell us a little bit about it? How important are the questions that we ask our students during the school day?
Okay, yeah, I have a YouTube channel, and there's actually one of my videos about asking questions, because I did quite a bit of work. I did a lot of work on critical thinking. In fact, I wrote a book with National Geographic called Critical Thinking in ELT.
Nice.
And in that book, I was looking with my co-author, Paul Dummett, we were looking at lower order thinking and higher order thinking. This idea that there are some questions we ask in class which are just checking understanding, or they're checking memory. And then there are some questions we ask which are developing critical thinking. And there are some questions we ask which develop creativity and creative thinking. And it's quite interesting when you look at the research on questions. There have been a few studies on question asking. And in 2 studies, they recorded teachers' lessons and they wrote down all the questions that the teachers asked. And they discovered that about 95% of the questions we ask as teachers tend to be lower order thinking questions. So they're questions like, what is the answer to number 1? Did you do your homework? Can you sit down? Can you look at exercise 2? Do you know the answer to number 3? They're all these checking questions. Now, they're important questions. They're things that teachers do. But then they looked at questions that were developing critical thinking and creative thinking. And only about between 4 and 8%, depending on the study, actually were asking students to think more deeply or to think critically or creatively. And I think this is a real issue. And if you can record your own lesson so easily now. And actually, I mean, if I record my own lesson, I listen back. I think, oh, why didn't I ask that question there? You know, I missed an opportunity. I do teacher training. I observe teachers, and I just think they just need. Let's just challenge the students a bit more. Students want to sort of really think and talk about something more deeply. Don't just check the answers or just, I mean, asking yes, no questions. Ask more open questions, you know, ask what, why questions. So, and there's a lot of research there that shows, you know, you ask those higher order thinking questions, students have to think more deeply. It's harder work, but in terms of memory and engagement,
Yes,
you're going to get better results. The research would suggest. There's a very good book on asking questions by a writer called Rag, for example, and he did a lot of recording and looking at lessons and looking at the research. And I think we know this as teachers anyway. We don't necessarily need the research. We know from our own teaching experience that if we ask the right questions, we will engage students. You know, it's not something new particularly, but I think and it's good for me as well when I'm writing materials to keep that in mind, that I need to write materials that will help teachers ask those higher order thinking questions. And in the last few years, I think I've become much more self-conscious about trying to include those higher order thinking skills in the books that I'm writing so that there's a kind of balance.
I see. There's a balance. Thank you very much about it. Yes, it's really important to Ludo Drama mentioned, like, we need to make the students think with our questions. Yeah, you are right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
But and again, it's a bit like feedback. You have to choose the right moment. I mean, there are some times when it's useful to ask yes, no questions if you want to check something, but there are other times to ask open questions. And open questions take longer as well. I mean, the typical wait time of most teachers when they ask a question, particularly inexperienced teachers, they might leave 1 or 2 seconds.
Exactly.
And we all remember when we were new teachers, we asked the questions and the students looked at us and we all panicked and we just gave them the answers. We thought, they don't understand, I'm going to give them the answer. Well, they do understand, but they've got to think of the answer and then they've got to turn it into English. I mean, that takes time. So you might wait 3, 4, 5 seconds for a yes/no answer. But if you're going to wait for an answer to a higher order thinking question, you need to leave, 10 seconds, 20 seconds. Maybe you put them in pairs, they discuss it and they prepare their answer. Maybe they need 2 or 3 minutes to think of the answer. And I think what happens is teachers panic when students don't answer instantly, when in fact they just need time. You know, so.
I see. All right. Thank you very much, John, about it. Yeah. And so let's move to other question then. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And this question is also, I think, interesting, but I'm sure that you have a really great answer to them. Can you tell us 5 adjectives that describe an effective language teacher.
5 adjectives.
Yeah, to describe an effective language teacher. Yes.
Careful.
Careful.
Particularly in planning, I think.
Planning.
Caring. They need to be empathetic. They have to care about the people they're actually teaching. When they go into the class, this one's a bit controversial, but I think they need to be controlling to a point, particularly early on in the course. In fact, earlier I was talking about teaching young learners. I had a friend who said the best advice I ever had for young learners was when you go and teach young learners, don't smile for the first few lessons. let them know that you're in control. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. I think smiling is good, but students want to know that the teacher is in control, and so you're the manager of the class. But in contrast to that, you need to be fun and engaging. And in order to make those lessons motivating. But I think the key adjective, or it's not so much an adjective, but as a teacher, you're called a teacher, but really you're a learner, and you're constantly trying. If you're really going to teach well, you're constantly trying to learn more about teaching, aren't you? Or you're trying to learn more from situations. Like you asked me earlier, what were some of the worst experiences I've had as a teacher? The only way to deal with that really is to just learn from it and say, okay, I made a mistake, I screwed up. What do I need to do differently next time? So willingness to learn, which willingness is that's actually a noun, but you've got to be willing. Yeah. You want adjectives, I know, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean.
Yeah, I got it. Over. Thank you very much. So let's move to another question. This is also really interesting. What is the most interesting questions you have ever been asked by a student or a teacher in the classroom or webinar or seminar, etc.? You remember?
I can think of not so much interesting but challenging questions. I mean, I've had students who've asked me, why are we learning this? And I have been in situations where I haven't really known myself, because as a teacher, you're just told to teach it. And so I think it's important to when you go into class that you know what this will give the student. I mean, in the past, lots of course books were designed so they were just lists of grammar points. And the answer to that question, why you're learning this, would have been, well, it's good for you. Is it? I don't know. But it comes back to what I was saying earlier about needs and the needs of the students and why you're learning it. And I think you need to think about it's fine to be teaching a grammar point as long as you can justify it in the bigger picture. And so if a student says, well, why do I need to know this? Well, you've got an answer for it, because it'll help you in a certain kind of situation. So those kind of questions are good. I mean, I think it's interesting when students ask you personal questions, and I don't think sometimes you can interpret it as kind of being cheeky, but actually I think teachers often ask students quite personal questions. What do you think? What do you like? What kind of food do you like? What do you do in your free time? What do you do at the weekend? Well, as a teacher, if you're going to ask those questions, it's only fair that the students get to ask those questions. And actually, I mean, we talked about philosophy earlier. One of my philosophies is don't ask a student to do a task if you're not willing to do it yourself. And it's the same as, don't ask students a question if you're not willing to give the answer for you as well. So if you ask a question that might be personal in some way, I think you've got to be prepared to answer it yourself. So, I mean, students ask you all sorts of questions about, your family life or your what you do in your free time and so on. I mean, that can vary. And then other interesting questions tend to be sort of topic related. I mean, some of the most interesting questions I used to get was when I was teaching business English, and particularly when you're teaching one-to-one lessons, because quite often when you teach one-to-one and you're helping students with English for their job and so on, it tends to be a relationship that's much more equal than in the classroom,
Yeah.
because you're teaching English, but they're sharing information about their working life that's genuinely interesting. And so all sorts of interesting questions can come up in that situation.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also I find as I get older, if I teach younger students, they genuinely start asking me more and more questions about what was it like when I was younger, what was life, what was life like before mobile phones, and that kind of reminds me of how old I am. But they're genuinely interested in the world before technology, for example. So they, I get asked those kinds of questions more and more. But I think that just comes with age, probably.
I see. Thank you very much for this answer, John.
Do you
All
have
right,
an answer
so
to that question? What's the most interesting question you've ever been asked?
actually, until now, I didn't have anything interesting questions from the students. They they ask me how old are you? Like they ask me because they're in fifth grade, or they ask me, are you married?
Yeah.
Or do you have a kid? What's your kid's name? Which team do you support?
Yeah. No, which team you support is a popular one, and they're always disappointed if they haven't heard of the football team, because I grew up in a town that my nearest football team was Lincoln City. Lincoln is a city in England, and there's a very small football team. So if you enter Lincoln City, most students in other countries are really disappointed because you don't say Manchester City or Manchester United or whatever. So I had to start saying the name of a Premier football team that they would have heard of. So I started to say Tottenham Hotspur, but yeah, or if it was the European Championship and it was Barcelona versus
Barcelona.
Manchester City, I would obviously say the English team. Yeah.
Yeah, and these are the interesting ones.
Yeah.
All right then. So let's move to another question. This is also very interesting, and I really wonder what is your answer. If you could have one superpower to use in the classroom, what would it be, and how would it help you?
This one actually was quite easy to answer. It's invisibility. I think if you think of sort of superheroes, the person who can make themselves invisible, that's a really good skill for a teacher. I think it's sometimes teachers, we forget that when we've succeeded in a lesson, it's the moment when we've introduced it, we've engaged the students, we've helped them with the study, and then it's time for them to go off and be activated and work. And we need to take the step back. And I'm guilty of this, and I observe lots of teachers who are guilty of it. Teachers feel that they're there, so they should somehow be involved. But actually, when you really succeed in a lesson, it's that moment when you can just disappear. And I sometimes watch lessons and I think this is the moment the teacher should just disappear. And I'll say it in feedback, you need to make yourself invisible at that point. You don't need to be there. It's not important that you're checking what they're saying all the time, because you can do that in another stage of the lesson. So I think, yeah, invisibility is probably a good one.
Yeah, really. Thank you very much. Thank you. And so let's move to another question. By the way, just a couple questions left, not much, 2 or 3 questions.
Okay.
And the time flies. And it's
How
really
much time have we got left?
I don't know, actually, 5 or 7 minutes or something like
anyway.
this. No problem. Actually, I don't want this time finish because this is really great moment to have you here.
Do we still have anybody listening to us?
Yeah, we still have.
Hello?
And now we have.
Are they typing anything? Because I don't see any comments or anything.
No, they are. They are writing the comments here.
Oh, I'm not
and
seeing.
there are.
Okay.
They are. And also there are some questions, but I can't see. If you have any questions, please write them into the question part, because during the conversation, of course, you can ask also to John if you have any questions. And but please write them into the question part. If you write it in the comments, sometimes we cannot see it during the conversation. It goes up and we miss it. But if you write it in the question part, we can see it. And my next question is, I know you have lots of experiences about ELT, so can you suggest us to read about ELT? What can you suggest us, actually? What should we read?
Well, to read, well, I'm the series editor. I showed you earlier this book, ETpedia.
Yep.
And this wasn't the first ETpedia. Actually, there was a book I wrote called ETpedia, like Wikipedia. And the idea was that I wanted to write. I often trained new teachers, and they would say to me, "Look, what's the one book I should read after the course to just help me with everything?" And I could never recommend just one book. So I thought, I wonder if I can write that one book. So I wrote a book. It was a teacher resource book called ETpedia. And it had, my idea was it would have 1,000 ideas, 100 kind of units with 10 tips and ideas per unit on everything that you would need early on in your career. So 10 ways to make writing lessons fun or interactive, 10 ways to present grammar, 10 ways to use technology, and so on. So the book came out about 7 years ago with a small company called Pavilion ELT, and they publish a magazine called English Teaching Professional and Modern English Teacher. But they also publish these resource books for teachers. So I wrote that, and then the book did quite well. And then we said, well, we could do follow-on books. We could do ETpedia Teaching Teenagers or ETpedia Technology.
I see.
And each of these books has 500 tips on specialist areas. So there's one on young learners, one on business English, one on materials writing, which I showed you, one on vocabulary, and so on. So those are quick and easy books to read and pick up on if you don't have much time. If you want more theoretical stuff, then I've written books like this, Critical Thinking ELT, which is, it's practical, but it takes a bit more thinking. Other books I like books by Scott Thornbury. When I do teacher training, I recommend his book, The A to Z of ELT, because if you just want a kind of dictionary of ELT terms, it's very good. I'm quite an ELT geek, I think, in that I like picking up course books. Course books get criticized a lot, but I actually like picking up course books and looking at them. And I'm always interested in new course books to see what's influencing course books, because course books tend to reflect new trends and new discussions. So it's always interesting just to flick through course books and see what's influencing the design of books. And also in terms of teacher training, I don't think one thing that I would like to see more of on teacher training courses is teachers being trained in the ability to analyze a course book properly. I think it's a real skill to identify what will make a course book successful or not successful. And actually, you know, because when a school chooses a course book, it's a big kind of investment, and they might decide they're going to use it, and then they're using it for the next 5 years. So you want to be certain it's right. So I think people need to learn how to read course books properly and analyze them and be able to identify what's going to work with their students. Other things they can read, I mean, I read people's blogs. Somebody who's interviewing me next week is Cecilia Nobre. She's a Brazilian teacher based in Turkey. She does lots of interesting stuff. She did a materials writing course with me in the summer. I've got other people out there who write their own materials who I've worked with, so I often kind of look at the kind of materials. And I you know, I mean, like everybody, these are friends, contacts on social media and so on. What I think is quite interesting, and this links to the fact that I've got a YouTube channel, is that I find myself reading less and watching more, because so much content now is delivered through video. And the
Videos,
fact that we've all
exactly.
gone online with Zoom and so on and doing online teaching means we're much more screen based. And it kind of makes sense that a lot of what we say and do with teaching can actually be illustrated quite effectively through video. So, I mean, obviously, I like reading books and so on, but I do think there's a lot of potential to move a lot of sort of teacher development into sort of
I
video
see.
formats and so on.
Thank you very much about these suggestions. John, there's a question.
Okay.
Let me look. Just a moment. Here is the question. What does he think about the future of English teaching? Will technology replace teachers to a serious degree, or will they remain... Sorry, will they... I missed the question. Just a moment. Will they remain... Yes. Will technology replace the teachers to a serious degree, or will they remain as supplementary elements like now?
Gosh, that's a big question. You're asking me what are some of the most difficult questions I've been asked. That's a really difficult one. I think, I mean, if you go back sort of 100 years, you would think that there will always be the place for the teacher because we've always had technology, we've always had blended learning. I know we talk about blended learning as though it's something new, but it's not. I mean, all learning is blended because
Yes.
it's always a combination of different things. It's not, I mean, the teacher's only partly responsible. The students take learning from all sorts of places. And if you look at, like when I learned French at school, I learned French with headphones, a tape recorder, and a teacher presenting it. It was the audiolingual approach, basically. You listened to recordings and you listened and repeated. But we didn't do it all the time. We had lessons with the teacher as well. And then sometimes we had lessons with the technology. But and everybody at the time thought the technology was the solution, but it wasn't. And in fact, in the end, it died out because you could only learn a certain amount from that. I think what's slightly different now is that people are doing interesting things with algorithms where the software is learning to identify student errors or the technology. There's some technology out there that I've looked at that is actually able to suggest to the teachers what the student should be learning next. But there's quite a long way to go to it. And I think the other thing that's interesting is earlier we talked about what were some of the really big challenges when we all started doing live online teaching. One of those challenges was becoming familiar with the technology. But the second tech challenge, the bigger challenge, was how do you build rapport and maintain engagement and motivation? And I think that problem's coming up all the time because that's the bit the technology can't do. That's the bit that needs the teacher. It's got to be the person motivating and engaging the students. And technology obviously engages students to a point, but only in it's one type of engagement. Like video games are one type of engagement. I still think there's got to be the teacher there managing it, pushing it forward, giving the students direction. So I would like to think not. I do think there's potentially a situation where the technology might de-skill the teacher if the technology starts to identify error and then correct students and so on. There might be a situation where teachers aren't trained in those kinds of things. But I don't know. I mean, we're talking science fiction here. Who knows? You know, I mean, nobody knows yet. I mean, you know, if you think technology's been around for a while, but it took the pandemic to suddenly make all the teachers actually go online and do it. And now you said at the beginning of this session, thank God we're all going back to face-to-face teaching. Well, why, thank God, you're going back to it? What is it about the face-to-face class that you prefer to the using the technology.
The thing is that, like, when it's the being in the classroom, in the real environment, is really, the looking at the students' eyes in the classroom, in the real life, you can't do that on the online teaching. You can touch the hearts of the student with the online teaching,
Yeah.
but in the face-to-face classroom, you do that. You can do that.
And
Just yeah, please.
well, no, I think it was illustrated by once I'm in England, and once we got with the pandemic and we started having the vaccines over the summer, suddenly everybody went outside and they wanted to go to music festivals, and we just hadn't had that sense of being with other people. And I thought it was quite a good, strong indication of that need. But it's all about balance, isn't it? I mean, there's absolutely nothing
Exactly.
wrong, and there's ways which we can embrace the technology, use it in the classroom in the way that it just reflects every other aspect of our life. But it's all about balance. I don't think it's necessarily about replacement. And sometimes I think we kind of overcomplicate it with the technology. I mean, one thing I see teachers doing is trying to use lots and lots of technology in one lesson, and you just think, just calm down, just use the chat and use the webcam today. Don't try to bring in 10, 20 other apps and things. It's not, I mean, all it's doing is technology is providing a function to help us sort of teach this class.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be complicated. Like now at the moment, we're having sort of, what's amazing about it is that, we would never have met. And this evening, we wouldn't have been having this conversation if it wasn't for a mobile phone. So it's positive in that sense of engagement,
Yeah, of course.
interaction, isn't it? So as long as we're using it in that way, I can't see that there's a problem. But I don't see how it replaces the teacher, because you still need that human focus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John. All right, so let's move to the last question of tonight. I think it's better. Huh? We are all tired.
You sent me 20 questions. Have we really had 20 questions?
No,
Oh.
we don't. We don't, because I just checked the time and it's almost it's 1 hour. It's almost, we passed an hour, so I need to to skip some of the questions.
Okay, well,
So which
choose
is better?
your favorite. Or I'm happy to answer whatever question. So go ahead.
All right then. So here is the last question. What is your motto?
Yeah, I didn't like this question, Volkan, because I thought, what is my motto? That is really complicated. I tell you what, I have a few mottos, but one of my current ones is, and this relates to materials writing actually, but it's true for teachers. And I've been writing a lot recently, materials for lower levels, for elementary, pre-intermediate, A1, A2 students. And my philosophy with the writing has been, just because you're writing for low-level learners, it doesn't mean it has to have low-level interest. And I think this is true for teachers as well. There's a danger that because a student has a low level of language, we think that's equal to the level of intelligence or the level of engagement in topics. And actually, if you pick up low-level course books, because the language level is low, quite often the interest level is really low. And you think, well, if I was a student, I wouldn't be motivated to use that. And it's true for the classroom. So I think, I think low-level learners deserve materials with high-level interest, would be my catchphrase at the moment. Low-level learners deserve materials with high-level interest. And by that I mean, if you're going to include photographs, make those photographs genuinely authentic and interesting. If you're going to include video content, make it be video content that not only teaches English, but tells students something new about the world, so that when they leave the class, they go home and they see their friends and the parents and say, "I never believe what I learned in my English class today." And they're not talking about the English, they're talking about the actual topic. And I think that's true for when we plan our lessons. It's not something you can do all the time, but I think a lot of the time we need to think carefully about the topics and subjects that we include in our materials. And just because we're writing them, because of the limits of the language we can choose from, we have to find ways around that. We can still keep authenticity in the materials. So I think that would be my sort of motto philosophy, if you like. Yeah.
I see. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much, John. And that's all my questions. That's all of them for tonight. But before
I'd like to
finishing
know where
up,
all these people who are online with us, where are they all? Can they
they
type
are
their
they are
names,
from
please?
different countries. Actually, there were lots of there were others from different countries. But if you are still here, maybe if you write your countries, we will be really happy.
I'd just be interested to know where people are from and why they're spending Monday evening listening to me. And
Why? Oh, come on, they are all educators, most of them, and they are really happy, and we are really happy to listen to you. That was a perfect moment.
well, I'm
It was
guessing
really.
Ragazza del Mare must be from Italy. I can see the names of some people, but I don't see their comments necessarily. But I guess you see the comments, do you?
Yeah. No, you can also see the comments. You,
Can I?
yeah, sure.
I
There
haven't.
is a comment part. That
Mm,
Iran, is Spain, Turkey,
Spain, Turkey, yeah.
Iran,
Okay.
and I'm still waiting. I think I saw kind of from Argentina.
Well,
They
anyway,
were
great.
here. Ukraine, Mexico.
Very nice of you all to come along.
They
We
were more. Turkey, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think Russia,
Okay.
more and more, more and more. And Turkish teaching a group of what's it, psychotherapy students. Yeah, it's like that. Thank you. From Iran again, they call
I mean,
Abra.
if anybody's interested in my videos, if you go to YouTube, you can go to John Hughes ELT, and I've got a channel. In fact, there's a new video out today about lesson observation, and at the moment, I'm running a survey on observation in live lessons. So when people do live online lessons, I'm interested to know about lesson observation, because we observe each other, or we have teacher trainers and managers observers for face-to-face classes. So I was doing a survey into, has anything changed since we're observing live online lessons, and what additional things do we observe for? And interestingly, some of the things that have come out of the survey is that need to observe, can a teacher use the technology, and can they engage and build rapport with students? So the things we've been talking about this evening are reflected in that survey. So if anybody wants to take part in the survey, I'd love to hear from people and get their opinions and views. I'm going to republish the results in an article later this year.
Sure.
But it's on my YouTube channel, and the link is there. Or you can also find the link on, I think, on my posts on Instagram and Facebook and places like that. And I have a website that's johnhugheselt.com, and you can see the kind of stuff I do there as well.
I see. And I'll share it. I'll share that website. I mean the link from your YouTube channel here
Okay.
on my page, and so they can join it and they can write their comments about it. And yes, you were
No,
going to say something.
I was going to say the video just went live today, so it's gone up today, and I talk a little bit about how to observe lessons, and then I invite people to do the survey. So if anybody's interested, please take a look. Yeah.
Okay, they're writing there. Thanks. I will absolutely watch the videos.
Okay.
Says, and they will watch definitely. Anyway, before we ending our live session, John, would you like to add anything else?
No, I'd like to thank you for the I mean, you do all of this in your free time, yeah?
Sure. Every Monday at 9.
And who have you had? Who else have you had on? Do you get people from everywhere?
Yeah, from different countries. I have every week. I try to take here as a guest the different educators and teacher trainers and book writers, authors, and educators from different part of the world. I get the contact and I invite them, or sometimes they apply to become as guests, and so we do it. This is the 72nd week of Teacher Talks. It's really, really, it's a huge number.
That's amazing. That's real dedication.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm trying to do something useful to the teachers all around the world.
Very good. And
Thanks to you.
do you have regular people that come every time, or does it vary who comes?
There are, of course, there are some regular people that they come and join, and also different people every week they come from different parts of the world. It depends on where the guests come from.
Okay.
They come, they listen, and probably they listen after the session, because I upload these videos to Facebook page and LinkedIn and YouTube, and
Okay.
here also the 4 different platforms I upload them, so they have a chance to watch it after the session.
Very good. Okay. Well, I shall
Thank you very
follow on
much.
YouTube.
Thank you. All right. John Hughes was with us tonight, and he spent our precious time and knowledge and suggestions and advices. It was amazing to having you here. And that's all from Teacher Talks tonight. We will see each other next Monday at the same time on the same day with different educator. I'm really happy to have you here. And until next time, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, and take care of yourselves, and peace, and bye-bye,
Thanks
everybody.
everyone for coming.
Bye-bye, John.
Thank you, Volkan.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you. Bye-bye.